A recent study, pseudo-study, from Cornell University is very telling. Not in the way those who created it intended it to be, though. It is an extension of Data and Society's alternative influence network joke study. It attempts to validate its laughable findings and lend credibility to them, even though it has been extensively debunked at this point. The whole point is to use the name of the university to con the normies into believing lies and propaganda about YouTube radicalization after it not working with Data and Society pushing them. It is very clear the authors behind this Cornell study are trying to do this. I am sure they hoped having the name of the university on their study would lend to their getting the normies to buy into the lies and propaganda. Their doing this is very transparent too. If they were trying to hide any of this, they did a very bad job at it. In hindsight, I am sure they are probably wishing they didn't give away as much as they have in their little propaganda-filled study. That is, if they had any common sense. With a lot of what they say in it, you don't even have to read between the lines. Even when you have to, it isn't hard to get down to their true intentions. They overestimated their own intelligence while underestimating ours in doing this little pseudo-study. They never intended for it to be placed under any sort of scrutiny or read by average people for that matter. They just expected it to be widely accepted as factual and for talking heads to parrot its key points. They assumed that when a study comes out of Cornell University, the methods used and the results will be above reproach. The thing is, and this is too bad for them, there are too many people these days who do not fall for these types of tactics or someone trying to exploit their fears. When using a title like Auditing Radicalization Pathways on YouTube, it is clear that is what they are trying to do with the normie masses. It is a scary and ominous sounding title after all. The only time someone does something like that is when they are planning on exploiting the fears of people to push an agenda, which is exactly what they are trying to do and failing miserably at in this study. The left doesn't seem to realize that after years of crying about the mean, bad orange man in the Oval Office, they're labeling everyone who disagrees with them as some sort of bigot and everything else they have done to fearmonger, that these tactics do not work anymore on a large number of the masses. For the most part, the only people it works on are the far left and leftists. Which doesn't matter anyways. They are already Kool-Aid drinking true believers and will buy into pretty much anything they are told from the legacy and mainstream media. Which is exactly why this study's attempt to use fear-mongering, besides slapping Cornell on it, has not and will not work. If you have the time to go through it, the study is definitely an interesting read. Not to mention kind of entertaining as well if you are a fan of watching people do mental gymnastics to justify their positions with faceplant landings involved. I have provided a link to it in the description if you are inclined to check it out. I would suggest you at least take a quick look at it for yourselves in order to gain insight into this element of the left and the groundwork they are laying for the removal of wrong think from the public discourse on YouTube. It is only 18 pages long and has a lot of graphs and charts thrown in as filler, so it is probably a little over half that in length. It didn't take me that long to go through it, and what I saw led to me making this video. For more than a few decades now, the globalism and socialism-loving left has almost exclusively controlled the flow of information throughout the West. They embedded themselves like a cancer into the mainstream and legacy media. They did the same in Hollywood and education as well. As more of them gained entry into these industries, they gained more and more control over them. As they gained more control, they became the gatekeepers of knowledge and information. They have been the ones deciding what we see on television and in the movies, what we hear on the radio, what we read in newspapers, books, and magazines, what we learn in public schools and in our colleges and universities. As a result, we have been spoon-fed nothing but half-truths, lies, and propaganda designed to push their agendas as things we want as a society collectively, which over time has led to people believing that what they are being told to want is what they actually want. This is when only elements of the left want them in reality. This is how historically a minority has managed to gain dominance over the majority within society. Then the internet came along and allowed for us to dig under and go over the walls they erected that forced us to deal with them as the gatekeepers of news, information, and knowledge. The first time the left truly realized they had lost control and were no longer the gatekeepers was the 2016 presidential election here in the United States. The election of Donald Trump took them completely by surprise. They never thought it was going to happen. It never occurred to them to look at Brexit as a sign of things to come. They had just chalked that up as an anomaly and didn't prepare themselves for the possibility that they were no longer in control of or able to manipulate the hearts and minds of the masses as they had been through being gatekeepers that spoon-fed us their agenda-based lies, half-truths, and propaganda. They have been bombarding us for well over 3 years now with their bullshit. The more of it they try to pile on, the less effective it is with ever-increasing numbers of us. The Trump presidency, along with everything they have tried to pin on it and his supporters, has helped to speed up this process too. The dead horses they have been beating have nothing left to them but bleached, broken bones, and they honestly believe that they are fooling people into believing they are all alive and well. Their doing this is failing. They no longer control the flow of information because of the internet, and they know that too. It is why they are trying to take back as much of the control they once had as possible. This Cornell study is just one attempt at helping to make it happen. A lot of us already know it is their plan to get back as much of the control as possible they can over the flow of information. It doesn't take being a rocket surgeon to figure that one out. The left isn't exactly hiding what they are doing. They just aren't announcing it or trying to bring attention to it in general. But in the case of Cornell's auditing radicalization pathways on YouTube, it is a different story. They are actually being surprisingly open about what they are up to in their little pseudo-study. Which, in all honesty, it surprised me how open they are in it, even if you have to read between the lines with some of it. Usually, even if it's a junk pseudo-study like this one, they try to make it seem as unbiased and professional looking as possible. They didn't really do that with this one, though. For all intents and purposes, they actually admit that the left dominates and controls the legacy and mainstream media, along with academia, but they are no longer gatekeepers of information who are able to control the flow of it, and that is a problem for them. They also did the same in regards to the internet being what facilitated it happening as well. Shockingly, they even admitted that the alternative media as a collective group has surpassed the legacy and mainstream media in growth while theirs has stagnated. Which is exactly why those behind this study chose to categorize content creators in the alternative media into their neat little groups of the alt-right, alt-light, and intellectual dark web like they have. Their doing this is all about pushing some big scary alt-right boogeyman out there to invoke fear and the perception of stepping stones that lead people there. Those they've grouped into the alt-light and intellectual dark web, no matter how much they may have wanted to, couldn't be grouped in with the alt-right. It is clear they wish they could just do that and call it a day, but no one would buy it. Which is why they are using two gateway drug categories to put them in with the study and claim that if you consume their content, it is only a matter of time before you're a card-carrying, LARPing, alt-right Nazi. In order to prove that you are only steps away from becoming a card carrier of the alt-right, they intentionally used flawed methodologies to arrive at that clearly predetermined conclusion they came to before even starting the study, which I will be showing you an example of shortly. Before I do though, I want to get into why they are doing this and the fear that is driving it. See, there is one thing that stuck out with me from the study, even well after I was done reading it. It is something from the introduction that I find to be very telling to their motivations and fears behind it. Generation Z and beyond, in large part thanks to the internet, are the ones the left truly worries about when it comes to their loss of control over the flow of information. Yes, they are worried about it with the boomers, Gen Xers like myself, and to some extent millennials, but not nearly as much as they are in regards to Generation Z. Unlike the rest of us, they grew up with technology and the internet in their lives from day one. Because they have, their use has become second nature to them. The fact that it is second nature has allowed for a large number of them, one too large for the left to ignore, to either break free from the programming being forced on them, or it has made them immune to it, and it is the result of the left no longer being in control over the flow of information. It is clear the authors of the study know this too when they are putting this in the introduction like they did. The claim that there is a radicalization pipeline on YouTube should be considered in the context of decreasing trust in mainstream media and increasing influence of social networks. Across the globe, individuals are skeptical of traditional media vehicles and growingly consume news and opinion content on social media. In this recent setting, recent research has shown that fringe websites like 4chan and subreddits like the R. Donald have great influence over which memes and news are shared in large social networks such as Twitter. YouTube is extremely popular, especially among children and teenagers, and if the streaming website is actually radicalizing individuals, this can push fringe ideologies like white supremacy further into the mainstream. They could care less if children like those in Generation Z have access to alt-right and white nationalist content, or any extremist content for that matter. The same is true for boomers, Gen X, and millennials as well. Their going after that content is just a cover for the actual content they are worried about. The content of conservatives, mainstream right, and anyone else who doesn't subscribe to their cultural Marxist ideologies. The alt-right and white nationalism are on the fringes of society. They do not have the ability to move away from the edge of it towards the center and become mainstream. The only way for that to happen is for a fringe group to do what the far left has done with the Democrats, for example, infiltrate and co-opt an already mainstream political party. Which there is no way the alt-right would be able to do that because they hate Republicans and the Republicans hate them. Not to mention conservatives know that the alt-right subscribes to far-left ideologies like socialism, and there is no way they would let them into the Republican Party because of it. Then there is also the fact they are racists on top of it. Yet, even with all of this, the people behind this Cornell study want us to believe that the content of traditional conservatives like Steven Crowder are the first step to the alt-right. They're doing this is all about guilt by association, even if there is no association between actual conservatives and the alt-right. It is being done to help facilitate the removal, shadow banning, and silencing of conservatives because of their supposedly extremist views that only a few years ago were considered normal. These are mainstream views held by the right and even people in the center, which is probably why these views are now starting to win against the views of the left once again. Because they are winning, the left cannot have children, teenagers, and young adults after a day of indoctrination at school have access to those views via the internet. They cannot have them being able to use it to find information, facts, and points of view that contradict the left's programming that is being forced down their throats. The left knows if this is allowed to happen, they and their ideologies will lose. They have been seeing the results of this happening already, do not like that it is, and fear it with good reason. Because Generation Z has been able to go out on the internet and find diversity of thought, it has led to their choosing to flat out reject certain aspects of the cultural Marxist ideologies the left is trying to indoctrinate all of us into believing. The fact that they have done this is a direct threat to the power and dominance of the left. The left, in particular far left, has used cultural Marxism as the vehicle to gain power and dominance as a minority over the majority across the West. In order to maintain that dominance and the control it affords them, they need to keep indoctrinating each new generation into believing in their failed ideological system. Generation Z's rejection of identity politics and political correctness is an example of their doing this. Even at their age, they have realized identity politics and political correctness are being used to target certain groups that are part of the majority in order to demonize them and make them second-class citizens. They also realize that at their expense, it is also being used to elevate others in the minority above them. They know this is wrong, too. It is one of the many reasons why they have rejected both. This rejection of cultural Marxism's beliefs is growing, too. The more exposure Generation Z has to competing points of view and information contrary to what they are being indoctrinated into believing in school, the more of cultural Marxism they have begun to reject. The left clearly sees this happening. It is why we are seeing junk pseudo-studies like this one from Cornell being put out there to try to fearmonger with the masses. The left is afraid that if they do not put a stop to things by purging traditional conservatives, there are going to be more content creators from Generation Z popping up, like Soph here, for example. They cannot have someone like her, an innocent-looking, foul-mouthed 14-year-old girl who is a conservative, having a voice, especially with how she relates to her peers. Soph, like anyone from Generation Z, will always have more influence and sway over them than anyone outside their generation will. We naturally relate to people in our own age groups more than those not in them. The left cannot win against that. It is why they are doing what they are doing with their trying to purge conservatives from the internet. Which, on this note, in all honesty, Soph actually gave the left something they wanted when she moved over to Gavin McInnes's freespeech.tv and behind a paywall. She limited her reach to boomers, Gen X, and millennials who already agree with her views. Kids her own age are not going to pony up $10 a month to watch her videos. Their parents aren't likely to pay it either. What she's done here is something the left could have only dreamed of getting her to do. She silenced herself and took her own voice away from the conversation with Generation Z doing what she's done. There are those of us, though, who they cannot get rid of that easily, which is why there are studies being put out like this one from Cornell. They are the foundation that elements of the left are hoping to use to censor and purge content creators whose views do not align with the cultural Marxist views on the left. When it comes to these studies, the left is actually hoping that no one will read them beyond the abstract and introduction to them. Because if they did, people would see things like what I'm about to show you from this one from Cornell. On page 10, there are two very interesting admissions in the same paragraph about the methodology used to reach the study's predetermined conclusions that members of the alternative media are the gateway drug to white nationalism, the alt-right, and extremism. The first admission the authors make is that they are basing their research of YouTube radicalization off of nothing more than their assumptions about what is contained in the comments on videos and that there are comments on them. Here, see for yourselves. Noticeably, the findings related to this research question make the implicit assumption that commenting users are a good enough proxy for radicalization, and that comments in YouTube channels are supportive of the videos they are associated with. Actual research is not based on assumptions. It is based off of the scientific method and proving theories right or wrong using it. Yet here are the researchers of this Cornell study admitting they chose the former over the latter. But their doing it was the only way they could prove their ridiculous predetermined claims of radicalization true. They couldn't have done it otherwise. This is because of how they are basing what amounts to YouTube's radicalizing people on. They are using the number of comments on given videos as proof of it happening. The more comments a video has proportionate to views, the more it is radicalizing people. Which translates to, Anyone who makes more engaging content than the mainstream media must be radicalizing people towards extremism. They didn't care about what the people were actually saying. They only cared about how many are leaving comments. That was the whole reason for their assumptions about the comments being what they are. They still had to justify their assumptions, though. They had to at least appear not to be behind a pseudo-study designed to give reasons to silence any opposing viewpoints of the left, which they did try to do by claiming their assumptions were based off of quantitative research data. Data they conveniently collected, mind you. Which takes us to their second admission. They're admitting to the piss-poor methods they used to collect that data. First, the sheer amount of comments and high prevalence of comments per views in alt-right videos suggests that commenting users are a population worth studying, especially when in Section 4 we found that more alt-right channels had a very high percentage of comments per view. Secondly, during the 3-week annotation period, it was noted that a number of opposing comments is rather small. We went as far as to manually check 900 randomly selected comments, 300 from each community of interest, and found that only 5 could be interpreted as criticisms to the videos they were associated with. As identifying stance in short comments is a difficult research question on its own, we considered that commenting was a good enough proxy for our work. Did you notice how they tried to sound like they were being thorough in explaining their collection of the data to prove that all the comments were supportive ones while still managing to be extremely vague in the process? I sure did. So what if they went through 900 comments between the 3 groups they placed content creators in? That does not mean anything when you don't know the number of videos they were pulled from or the methodology used to select them. It also doesn't mean anything when you don't know how the comments selected were listed in the comments section and how they were selected from it beyond it supposedly being randomly done. Never mind their criteria to decide what was criticism. They could have easily slanted the data to back up their assumptions about the comments being favorable ones for their videos. Yet we are just supposed to believe that they were legit in collecting data that just so happens to conveniently back them up. This is when they could have easily cherry-picked it all through the use of a little manipulation. They could have easily taken a bunch of small alt-right channels with echo chambers in their comments and then used them for the collection of the comments for that group. This is while they could have used one large content creator in each of the other 2 groups, pulling comments from one of their videos, which that would clearly not be random, never mind a fair representation of their being favorable. How the comments were listed in the comments sections is another consideration they conveniently did not address. So is how they were pulled from them. If they had listed top comments first, they would more than likely get a different result than if they had listed newest first. That is a given. It is actually common sense the results would be different. But none of that matters when at the very end they are saying the fact that people were commenting was good enough for them to show radicalization because with short comments it is hard to tell their context. This is when I don't see how that would be a problem. If I were to say to the researchers of this study that they were a bunch of morons on a video they put out about it, I think they would be able to figure out the context pretty easily. Yet, here they are saying they were unable to figure it out with short comments as a whole, which they clearly did so they could just claim that all comments are favorable ones. At this point, I believe I have shown, at least in the case of the researchers behind this study from Cornell, that the loss of Generation Z and beyond due to the internet is a major fear of the left. They may not have made it a focus of the study, but that is because you never want to bring too much attention to your fears so others can find out what they are and exploit them. I also believe that I have shown this study is nothing but a fabricated piece of propaganda for the left designed to be used to justify the censorship and removal of content creators for supposedly being gateways to the alt-right and extremism. With that, my job is done. The left is only going to increase their doing things like this. It has been happening since the run-up to the 2016 presidential election and has only gotten worse since. You can hope for the best and hope that these things will change, but you have to plan for the worst. The left isn't just going to stop what they are doing unless we finally put a stop to it by rejecting them and their cultural Marxist beliefs. That is the only way things are going to get better. If you liked this video, depending on where you are watching it, please give it an upvote or thumbs up. If you want to know when new content of mine hits the internet, don't forget to subscribe to one or more of my social media or video accounts listed here. Also, with YouTube, don't forget to ring that bell. You can find all of my video content on both BitChute and YouTube. This may not be the case with other places I upload to, but I will try to minimize this happening. You are always welcome to interact with me at any of these sites on the list, so feel free to do so. If you have anything you want me to cover in a video, when it comes to news or current events, send it right along to me. I will try to do my best to cover it. As always, thank you for watching.